Welcome back, Komal, to another episode in this little mini-series that we're putting together all around stress-free productivity. Now, for the people that are listening and watching in this episode that haven't seen the first one, can you just give these people just a little bit of a background about yourself, who you are, what it is that you do, so that they've got a nice picture of who you are?
Hi, Danielle. Happy to be here and excited to do the second episode with you. Uh, I am a productivity and workflow consultant. So what my work is, it's really fun. I help people with clearing their minds, being focused on their goals, stay present, and achieve stress-free productivity using the Getting Things Done method. So, being a coach and a trainer, it's really exciting to see people from overwhelm to, now I got a clear list of what I need to do and I feel present in whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, very good. Now, getting things done, that's the David Allen methodology, I guess, of this realizing this stress-free productivity. Very, very, very well known. And you've had over 25 years experience in this space. You've worked with everybody from board of directors to C-suite people right down to new starters across many, many different industries or verticals as well. So you've got a really good breadth of knowledge across this space, and also helping people to get to this point of stress-free productivity. Now, in the first episode, for those that are watching and listening, we dive into what the GTD methodology is at a high level. We also then had a talk about the first step of the methodology, and that is the capture step. So, Komal, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of a recap of a high-level overview of getting things done, and then also that first step of the capture step and why that's so important.
Yeah, sure. So the Getting Things Done method is based on the book that is written by David Allen by the same name. It's a bestseller that he wrote in 2001. Um, and all it is a collection of best practices, right? That helps, people clear their minds and be present in whatever they're doing. So the method, yes, we have 5 steps, we call it, or the 5 behaviors that are interlinked with each other, right? So if we look at, what are those steps? So for you to completely, get things off your mind, stay focused on what you're doing, what you need to do. You need to capture all that is your attention. So that's step one. Clarify, make decisions about what to do, what not to do. Um, Step two. Step three is organize the reminders of whatever you made decisions in step two in appropriate places. Reflect. Step four is where you review all that you are committed to on a regular basis. And the GTD weekly review is at the center of this. But you do all kinds of reviews. So that's the review step. And engage is where you decide what to do. You made a trusted choice about what it is that you want to spend your energy, your focus on at any given time without worrying about things falling through the cracks. So that's the 5 steps. Now, the basis of this methodology, as we spoke about last in the last episode, is that your mind's for having ideas, not for holding on to them. And so we started with the capture step in the last episode, where we guided people to get things off your head. Because if you, let's say, this morning I was training a whole team, and one of them said, it seemed like I had a million things in my head, but when I did my mind sweep, uh, it was just about 130 things, right? But they felt like a million. Today was their session 2, and they'd just come back after doing a full mind sweep. So, it helps with. So that's the basis, and that's what we covered in the last episode.
And when people go through that process, that mind sweep process, what are the common reactions that people get when they actually do get all of this stuff out of their mind and into, let's call it, an in tray?
Um, we get a mix. So some people feel relief, right? Anybody who has been stressed and made a list knows this, that there's that immediate relief that they feel. But there is the opposite reaction. Some people feel anxiety, right?
Mm.
And some people feel, excuse me, some people feel both. A relief comes first and then the anxiety. And the reason for this, the anxiety part is there are two things to it. One is the subconscious mind wants to do whatever it is that they've written down right now. And the other part could be that they've had a finite amount of time to write things down, but they know there's more in their head than what they've written down. So it's not a complete list. So they may find that doing a complete mind sweep and then following through with the rest of the remaining four steps, can help relieve that anxiety.
Yeah, definitely. Now we're going to now tackle the next two steps in this methodology, and that is the clarify step and the organisation step. Now, if we tackle the clarify step first, so we've now done a mind sweep. We've got everything. We've got some practices in place, some tools in place to get everything off our mind onto an in tray that we know and we trust that we're going to use and look at every single day. Now comes the time or in the process to clarify everything that we're getting out of our head. Can you explain what this clarify step is?
So in the clarify step, we pick up each item that we have captured one by one and make decisions about it. The whole point of the clarify step is there are a few different reasons why we need to clarify. See, most people, before they come through this methodology, they work off what we call the mind sweep, the first step. They do the capture and they work off that. That's the list, the to-do list. The way the GTD list would differ is that as I explain this step, you'll see that we are differentiating actionables and non-actionables. Because you've got to understand that the actionables and non-actionables are like oil and water. They don't mix.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to separate them. The other thing is that what we want to do is we want to make decisions when things show up rather than when things blow up. Let me give you an example. Let's say you sent me an email on Monday today, and you need something by next Monday. I see that email, but I'm too busy. I didn't make any decision about it. I opened it, I closed it. Oh, I'm too busy today. Then the latest and the loudest took over. And I don't need to do something about it. It is one of my workmates who have to do something about it so that I can be ready for that on next Monday. So I didn't make a decision. And then Friday afternoon, I am having a panic moment. I forward this to my colleague. Now that colleague, she's working overtime to make it happen for me. It didn't have to happen that way, right? So I made decision when things blow up. Worse still, I could make a decision on next Monday morning. I got to do this. So making that decision on Monday with the clarify step, what am I going to do with it? If I had forwarded it on today itself to the colleague, she would have it ready by Wednesday or Thursday for me. She's not working overtime. There is no stress, nothing. So the clarify step helps with also making decisions when things show up, rather than things blowing up.
So with, let's say we've got an in tray, so we're getting things out of our head. We've got everything on our in tray. So if I understand correctly, this clarify step is all about getting this in tray to empty, but it doesn't mean that everything in our in tray needs to have some type of action associated to it. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there's as you said, we are getting that into empty, but emptying that in doesn't mean it's done also, right? So yes, not everything has an action, but also Not that all of it has to be done. It just means that we are separating the actionable by non-actionable. So what we would do is we would typically go, okay, what is it, right? Take up one thing at a time and just look at what is it? Is it actionable? Now, when we ask ourselves this question, a lot of us, tend to just take on things as things come through. We say yes to everything. So this question makes you pause and go, is this actionable given what else is on my plate? Right? So you really need to think about whether you want to, whether you have the bandwidth to do this. Of course, something can be done about some of the things. Okay. So then is it actionable? And there are two answers to it, yes and no. If it is not actionable, then you got three options. Either you may trash it, you need to keep it as a reference because you may look at it at a later point, you may need to refer to it, or it's something that you may someday do something about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it is actionable, then you want to think about, okay, what's my next action? What am I going to do about this? A lot of times the next action is not clear unless we put some thought into it. So this step really gets you to think about it. And then you based on what the next action is, you may do it if it's going to take you less than 2 minutes or so. If it's
So
going to take you,
is that a best practice or a good practice? Sort of that 2 minute time period. Whether if this thing on the intro is going to take less than 2 minutes, then we get it done straight away.
Yeah. So with the yes option, there are three options, right?
Yep.
Do it, delegate it, or defer it to a later stage.
Yeah.
Now, if your next action is going to take you 2 minutes or less, it is absolutely best practice, if you can do it where you are, to do it there and then. If your listeners get this 2-minute rule, it will save them months and months of their life, right? Because it is sheer efficiency factor. If I can do this in 2 minutes or less, it's better to do it than to list it, to track it, go back to it. It takes longer.
Yeah.
Right? How many emails, do you think would be 2 minutes, if you just sort of put your mind to it? Okay, is it actionable? Okay, it's a 2-minute thing. 2-minute returns. There are a number of emails. Not all the emails that you have are 2 minutes, but there are a number of emails that are 2 minutes, and they are out of your way. They're done as part of this clarifying process. So the 2-minute rule absolutely is a best practice.
So in this clarify step, so we've got our in trays, and let's, for argument's sake, say, for example, I use Microsoft To Do, and I've also got my inbox in my email as an in tray as well. So I've kind of got two in trays here that I get things out on, or things come into. I tend to get everything out of my head onto Microsoft To Do, whereas I've got things coming into my inbox as well in my email. So I've kind of got two places here. In this clarify step, is there a best practice for this process? I mean, when do we clarify? Do we do it on a daily basis, an hourly basis, or what's the best practice there?
So best practice for clarify step is to have as few buckets as possible, as many as you need. So you got your email, whatever comes out of your head goes into your to-do app for yourself, as you mentioned. You may have some voicemail or paper mail coming in, some incoming papers in your in tray, right? So having as few as possible, if you've got a few emails, some people have personal and work email, and that's something they can't avoid. So then they've got 2 emails. But some people have got 5-6 emails for whatever reason. Historically, they were on one, they moved to the other, so they're still active. Trying to get all of them to one place would be a good idea, because then, you've got fewer inbox. If you can't, then at least you have to have a checklist of where you are spread out, right? So as few as possible, as many as you need, but you
Yeah.
need to empty that on a 24-hour basis. So on a 24-hour to 48-hour basis, we say, because some days you may be too busy, right? So you may not be able to get to it, but on a at least on a 48-hour basis, you want to get that into zero.
So, would you
Now,
recommend time blocking a period of time in during a day to actually do this clarify step?
yes, and look, I think this would we usually discuss this in the engage step, deciding what to do. But yes, definitely, you would need sort of some time during the day that you allocate. Some people allocate it, some people intuitively do it when there's a gap in the. And either way, it's
Yeah.
fine as long as you can get to it. That's the main point, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's very good advice, and I think that flows directly into the next step as well. There's a little bit of crossover there as well around organising. So why, and this is you spoke about buckets before, but in this in that context, when you're talking about buckets, you're talking more about as I'll put it, the in-tray buckets. So you've got an in-tray list, maybe you've got an in-tray, you've got your email. So they're buckets in themselves. Now, when we talk about the organising step here, we also talk about buckets. So can you just outline, first of all, just at a high level, what this organisation step is all about?
So the organization step is about whatever you come up with in clarify step, right? Whatever next actions you come up with, or whatever. So I'll probably go back to the clarify step a bit before
Mm,
we come to this. But basically, organize means to putting things where they belong, right?
yep.
The meaning should match the location. So that's the definition of organize. Uh, Now, where you put it, you just need some sort of a task tracker. Somewhere you're tracking tasks, whether it's a paper and pen, whether it's a digital tool, doesn't matter. Now, going back to the clarify step, because we were discussing, we sort of went through some of the step. When I was talking about, if it is actionable, you've got three sort of options there: do it, delegate it, or to defer it. Now, for we talked about the 2 minute rule. So if your next action, you can do it in 2 minutes or less, do it there and then. Um, and if you were to delegate it, then you might want to put a note somewhere so that you can follow up on it if you need to, if you care that it happens, right? And then you got a defer. Defer is basically to a point. You can't do it right now because it's more than 2 minutes, and so you defer it to as soon as you can get to, or by a due date. The other thing you want to talk about in the clarify is this going to finish it, or are there more steps to do? Then you got a project, so you need to also have a list of outcomes that you are committed to achieve that are going to take more than one step to do.
Yeah.
So that what I'm trying to explain is that the clarify step is a little bit more involved. And once you get the results of this, I've got all these outcomes that I want to achieve. I have all these next actions to take. That's when where do I park this? That's where the organized step comes in, right?
All right, so let's now that we've got we're going through the clarification step. We've got and we're going through and we're identifying items that do have next actions, and that then I guess puts us into this organising phase or step as well. How do we go about, are there certain categories, and we talk about, I mean, I talk about Microsoft To Do. It doesn't have to be To Do. It can be any type of task tracking or list application that you mentioned. Are there any uh, basic or best practice lists or categories to have so that we can then assign our next actions to, so that we can organize those?
See, the important part is to use any task tracker or list manager that you are familiar with or you will use, right?
Because
So
that's important, right? Because you
it's the
need to
most
be able to,
important.
yeah, you need to be able to trust and you know you're going to use it all the time.
Exactly. David Allen says this, and that's quite true, which is, just buying a hammer uh, doesn't make you a carpenter, right? So a lot of times we get all this, wrapped around what tool to use, but it's not about the tool. It's about what you will use because it's basically the content of the list that is going to make a difference.
Hmm.
Um, and so no matter what tool you are using, you need a list of you need your a list of your next actions. You need a list of all the outcomes that you are committed to achieve. But in the organized step, there are a few different parts that people don't give much importance to, right? So let's talk about the non-actionables, because we talked about separating the actionables and the non-actionables.
Yeah.
And so we want to think about trash. Of course, is self-evident. If it's not actionable in trash, it's self-evident. But a lot of times we have not made that decision, and we may have a garage full of things that we probably should have thrown out, but we haven't thrown out. All of us have got a corner in our house or a place that we have, or maybe a drawer in the office that's full of stuff that we probably could have. So trash is probably making that decision is quite useful. uh, Reference is another one where you need tool to, reliable tool that you can find anything in 60 seconds or less, and you can file anything in 60 seconds or less, whether it's a physical file or a digital file. So it's important to have those in place as well for reference. You need a list of the incubate, the someday maybe things that you may do, things that I'm not committed to right now. So the no arm has trash, reference, and incubate. And
Hmm.
incubate is basically things that, given what I'm involved with, not now, right? Maybe 6 months later, 3 months later, I may get onto it, or I may never do that. But it's just an idea I've had, and don't want to lose the idea. See, there's no point or no advantage in rethinking having the same idea again unless you like having the idea.
So it makes sense with the reference material. It's like your filing system. So whether that is a digital filing system like OneNote or something like that, or it is a physical drawer that you file hard copies into a reference system. This someday maybe type of information or content, how do we store that? What are some tips around someday maybes? Where should we be? Is it just another list in our task tracking application that we use, or
It could be anything. It could be a list in your task tracking. It could be a mind map that you have. It could be, doesn't matter how you keep it, or
yeah,
it's basically a list of things that you want to get back to, reviewing. Your only commitment to that is to review at a later stage,
yeah,
right? So a lot of people, I mean, I have a client who has a totally paper system. His task tracker is paper based, but he uses Evernote for his someday maybe,
yeah,
right? So it doesn't even have to be the same tool that you're using for task tracking. Someday maybe can be whichever way works for you.
yeah,
And for some of them, they may be time specific. So, let's say there is a business breakfast that I'm invited to mid-November. I don't know whether I'll be able to go. I mean, with the lockdown and everything, we really don't know. But even if it wasn't, I would not have clarity about it, about my calendar, maybe 2 weeks from there. So I would put a reminder start of November to RSVP to that thing. Or it could be a conference I want to go. Or it could be anything, really. So someday maybe also is, I don't know, maybe I may go to this event. Then you want to put a reminder. And that also could be paper based, or it could be a reminder on your digital tool.
mm. It's and that brings up another interesting point around calendars and where your calendar comes into play here. I know a lot of people use calendars for their reminder list or their to do list all the time. Now, and you mentioned that just in that conversation and made a point about being reminded about something at a certain time. And previously what we've been talking about is more just almost like an action list with no sort of reminders or dates associated to them or things like that. So can you explain how the calendar or your own calendar comes into play in these steps too?
Yeah. So the calendar I just mentioned was about the non-actionable, but because there was, I was incubating it. I don't know whether I can go to this event. Maybe on the 1st of November, I'll make a decision. But that's on the no arm. In the yes arm, you have do, delegate, defer. Defer is where, you think about whether it fits in the calendar in terms of it has to be done on a day. If it has to be done on a day, it goes on the calendar. If it can be done by a day, then it can go on a list of things that you can do as soon as you can get to or by a certain date. So the calendar piece is quite interesting because a lot of people, we have used the calendar until we get trained for this. We have used the calendar to the best of our ability. We were introduced as a child. So a lot of people also put things they would like to do on the calendar, as you mentioned. And what they find is that when they have a commitment, they block some time on the calendar, it seems logical for them. However, they find themselves reshuffling that all the time because something else comes in, they're comparing, so they're rethinking, redeciding the same thing again and again. And that's, from our experience, that's a lot of energy that you're spending on something that doesn't need to be. So the calendar, from our perspective, should only be used for things that must be done on a day. Things that you can do as soon as possible or by a certain due date, you would need to put on a defer list. But, it's part of the defer sort of piece, whether you put it on the calendar or your next actions list.
Yeah. And what about from a reference side of things? We were speaking about reference type of material and filing that away, whether it is in a physical filing cabinet or in a digital filing cabinet. What have you found to be, and you're probably going to say this depends, but what have you found to be the best way of filing reference material? Is it topic based? Is it alphabetical? That type of thing.
Well, what we have found is one alphabetized list works very well.
Yeah.
Right. Now, given that, the key part is here that you should be able to find something in 60 seconds, file something in 60 seconds, and find it back, retrieve it in 60 seconds. Sorry. Right. So if I can do that with the digital, the search function working well, some people will say, look, I just want one place where I put it and I'll search for it using keywords. And we say, okay, that's fine. As long as you can retrieve it in 60 seconds, it's okay. Right? The best practice for the reference is that it should be fast and fun. And you want to keep it current, which means it needs to be at least purged once a year.
Not many people would associate filing reference material as fun.
Because they may have some complicated systems or they may not even know where they are spread out. Digital is actually very, very sinister. You can spread out and it's off your mind, but not off your mind. So the reason is that you may lose track of it, but your subconscious mind is keeping track of, I've lost something. I don't know what it is, but I've lost it. And then it's that gnawing sense of anxiety of what you lost may wake you up in 3 a.m. So being very clear about where you are spread out. With the current sort of situation, people would be spread out. They would have the network drive. They would have, digital sort of their computer folders. They would have physical filing, cloud. So they could be spread out, but as long as you know where everything is and you review it once a year to make sure that you want to keep that. Otherwise, it just ends up being a place where things are going in, but nothing's being used.
Mm.
So you're just storing and storing and storing, but you really aren't able to use it because you don't even know it's there,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So a lot of times, and I've seen this over and over again, where people think they've got a good filing system, or they put documents or they put reference material in somewhere, but then when they actually go and try and find it, they can't find it. But at that point, they think they're doing the right thing and they're filing it away in what they think is a good system, but it takes them forever to find it, and they end up giving up and losing or not going back to it. And that's another point where I think using tools that you know and you trust that you're going to use over and over again every single day, and it becomes habitual to actually use those tools, I think is really important throughout this whole process. So whether it is Microsoft To Do, or it is OneNote or Evernote or SharePoint or OneDrive, or whatever the case may be, we just need to make sure that we understand where those things are, how to use them, and it becomes habitual in how we're actually going about doing all of these processes. Now, we haven't spoken too much about, and probably the last thing I want to touch on here is it is in this organisation or organising step, as we say, and it's about the different types of lists that we should have, or that you would recommend having or creating, so that we can tackle these next actions. So, for example, if I'm sitting at my computer, I've got a list of things that I can do, or next actions I can take when I'm sitting at my computer. Same thing on my mobile phone, or that type of process. Can you give a little bit of an insight into maybe some, 3 or 4 or 5 different lists that are common and that people use for that process?
So the basic list that we recommend is, having a list of the long-term outcomes that you want to achieve. That's,
So you call them projects, right?
projects, outcomes,
Yep.
whatever people call
Yep.
them. Uh, then you want to have a list of next actions. You want to have a list of things you're waiting for other people to do. And of course, your calendar. Calendar is a list. It's a list of things that must happen on a day,
Yep.
particular day. Now, the next actions list can be split up. It's not necessary though,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of times when we coach people, we start with just one list. And then they may say, okay, you know what? I make a lot of calls. It might be useful to have a separate list of calls. Okay, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
So the context-based list that you're talking about, yes, it's possible, but they're not the most required thing in GTD. Yes, we came up with that approach, right? The method, we came up with that approach, but we are not big on that. That's the only way to do it. A lot of times we will start with what is the key thing that you want to do, though, is to come up with your next action. So you have a clear mind. I mean, a lot of times we look at something and go, oh, presentation next week. If I just capture that, I've got to have presentation next week. I look at it each time. I've not made a decision about what I need to do. It will repel me. But if I say, okay, with the presentation next week, I need to just sit down and brainstorm some ideas. Next action is to just brainstorm my scope of what I'm going to talk about. I can do that, right? The presentation itself seems like a gigantic thing because it is a big presentation, very important presentation. And just looking at it, if I don't make a decision about what I'm going to do next, I will look at that list and go presentation next week. My brain's going to fry. So
So
the key thing is,
in that example, would a next action be to time block some time out in my calendar to actually brainstorm? Would that do we go down to that granular level?
well, the next section is to draft some action, draft the scope of the presentation, right?
Yep.
Draft some ideas or brainstorm some ideas about it. Now, whether it will go on the calendar or not, that depends on, does it have to be done on a particular day, or can it be done anytime I can get to within the next week? So that will depend. I mean, let's say I think of that's my next action, and I realize, the next 4 days are going to be so busy, I won't be able to get to it by next week. Thinking of a work week,
Hmm.
then I may put it on my calendar for today, but doesn't have to be. It will go in my next actions list.
Yeah.
But there is a due date, and I may put a due date there because it is a time specific thing. So it depends. A lot of it is depends.
Yeah. So
I
I've got in that scenario what I would tend to do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and point me in the right direction. So let's say I've got a presentation next Monday. I would want to be prepared for that before Monday, so I'm comfortable with presenting. So maybe let's say on the Friday, I want to have the Friday before the Monday, I want to have everything completed and I'm ready to go. So what I don't want to do is start the brainstorming and things like that on the Thursday or even on the Friday morning. So I would probably put something in my calendar to time block out, and maybe my next action would be to brainstorm ideas. But that brainstorm ideas session, I want to do sort of 3 days out from the Friday. So maybe on the Tuesday. Is that does that sound like a decent enough process and next action?
It could. So let's say, I mean, there are a few ways to tackle this, right? So it will all
Yeah.
depend on what this is. So let's say you think about, okay, this brainstorm. Okay, after that, I need time to finish this process to get to presenting, right? And so
Hmm.
it is possible that you realize that you're going to need about 5 hours between now and next Monday to do this. And you may time block every day, a few hours each day to do this, go through this. But that's because it's a time system. Like you need 5 hours, and you're not going to get those five
Yeah.
hours in one go. So you're breaking them up. The other way you may handle it is, let's say you put a reminder on Wednesday, because if you've not started by Wednesday, you know that you're going to be in trouble, and you
Hmm.
just put a reminder. It's on your next action list, but you just put a guardrail, sort of, have I started on this thing? And you may have started on this thing on Tuesday. So
Yeah.
you may go, yeah, if I've not started, let me start on this. So that's that, you could have a guardrail as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
It
So
just depends
on that
on
next
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so on that next actions list, on the next action item for brainstorming ideas for the presentation, you might put a reminder on that item to remind you on Wednesday that you need to brainstorm this.
You may, yeah.
Yeah,
As I
yeah,
said, it all depends on what that item is, what is the sensitivity to it, and there's no one answer to that.
yeah.
There's no
But
right or wrong.
a good starting point then for people that are just starting to implement GTD would potentially be just a single next actions list, and then moving on from that, potentially even if you're doing a lot of similar actions, like you mentioned phone calls before, that you might have a separate next action list called phone calls, and then you'd put all your phone calls that are next actions on that list.
Yeah, you could
Hmm.
start out like that. See, we are, because this episode we are actually covering clarify and organize, right? This is a big.
Yeah.
We are covering two big topics, and
Yeah.
so we're jumping back and forth. So one of the things that I find, I mean, and that's what we do in our courses as well, is to separate the
Mm.
clarify and the organize, because there's a lot in that clarify. If you get that right, and
Yeah.
then you put into organize, so then it makes it very clear where things go,
Mm.
right? um, but because, I mean, of course we can't cover that much in the half an hour episode or 40 minutes episode that we have. um, yeah, so it is an involved process to understand both these steps. Clarify is basically you want to triage everything that comes through
Yeah.
and go, okay, is this actionable or is it not actionable? What is my next action? Get to really make decisions when things show up, so that my work is very clear. And if my work is very clear, then when any new opportunity comes in, I can quickly look at what I'm already doing and having that clear idea. And if I have to communicate with my team about setting expectations about whatever is on my list, it becomes very easy to do that. So the whole clarify step is about slowing down to speed up later and sort of going, okay, let me first finish the thinking of this particular item, and then you organize it. And where you organize becomes clearer as you go through the process slowly.
Mm. Yeah, so that clarify step, it really is a big part of what we're doing here as well, and I would assume that it come and you get better at that with practice.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I mean, most of the people that come to us, if they have had, look, people come to us at different levels. Some people have already tried GTD on their own, and they're stumbling with this clarify and organize space, because
Mm,
it is there's a lot of subtlety to this. There's a lot of subtlety and sophistication to how you clarify and organize. And some people may come without knowing what it is, right? So they're coming with a clean slate. But this is the part, this is clarify and organize, is where we find there is a lot of improvement opportunities in people slowing down, understanding the methodology, putting it through every time. And once it becomes a habit, you just don't, you just think in terms of what's my next action, what's my project for actionable items very quickly. Um, but this is a step, it's more subtle than we think,
mm.
the clarify and organize piece.
Yeah. There, that's very good. It's they're two very very big and important steps as well. Combining that with that first step of capturing you're getting very well, getting into some complex things there. Well, what could be anyway as well, and it does. And I have found, and I have spoken to others, that it can become very, very overwhelming as well when you get to, especially doing mind sweeps through the capturing process, actually seeing what everything that's coming out and everything that you do have on your plate, but then going through that clarification step. And I like that the 2 minute rule that you mentioned before as well. If you can do it under 2 minutes, then you just do it then and there. And I find that has that especially that part has helped me a lot in terms of getting things done really, really quickly as well. Now, before we wrap things up, are there any simple processes, especially we've spoken about the capturing stage, and I think we've got that covered very, very well. Now, if we've got people that are just starting out with this process, what are some best practice or some little tips that you can give them to enter the clarify step and then into the organization step, so that they don't get so overwhelmed with those processes?
So what they can do is pick up each item that they have in the in the capture step. They for the mindset that they did. Go separate the non-actionable with the actionable. So is it actionable? No. Then whether it's a reference, is it incubate, whether it's trash, figure that out. If it is actionable, of course, as you said, the 2 minute rule itself will save months of their life.
Mm,
If it is actionable and it's more than 2 minutes, they were to delegate it to somebody, then they need to make a note in a list to follow up list, right?
yep.
So we call it a waiting for, but it doesn't matter. You need to have a, so they could delegate it, then they need a waiting for list. If it is something they have to do and it's more than 2 minutes, then they want to think about, okay, what do I see myself doing right now? Write that next to it, and any outcomes that they want to achieve. What's the ultimate outcome here? So if they just start with that, making that decision about what is the next thing they're going to do about this, and what's the ultimate outcome, what is the finish line for this particular thing, um, I think that would be a good sort of way to start with this process and start engaging this as material. And I would also recommend, uh, reading the book, Getting Things Done book. It's written like a manual,
Mm,
um, and a very detailed one, might I say. So having that, and I find that rereading the book, after years of doing this, I find more value out of it every time. because as one of my clients mentioned, it's because we have changed. So it's a more mature us every time we read the book again. But
Yeah.
yeah, so another starting point is to read the book. It's a fantastic resource to sort of go through and understand how to keep your mind clear, stay focused on whatever you're doing, and not have any stress about it.
Yeah, yeah, very good advice. Well, Komal, let's wrap things up there. Thank you again for jumping on this episode. We've got one more episode to come where we're going to look at the reflect and engage stage and then wrap things up so that people can begin their journey to this stress-free productivity. As we mentioned at the start of the episode 1 was all about the GTD methodology itself, and we also dove into the capturing stage. In this episode, we took a look at the clarify and the organisation step. You gave some amazing tips there, so everybody that's watching and listening have got something out of that. I'll pop all the links again into the show notes so that everybody's got all of that information. So once again, thank you very much, and we'll tackle the last 2 steps in the next episode.
Happy to be here, Danielle. Always a pleasure to see you and talk to you. I look forward to the next one.